Hi friends, and welcome to Cracked with Siobhan Harris. Today, I'm speaking with Ted Ellison of Theodore Ellison Designs. The way Ted's love and extensive knowledge of historic architecture and decorative arts is woven into his body of work is on a level that I have never seen. He and his studio crew work collaboratively with homeowners, architects, and designers to deliver one-of-a-kind interior and exterior mosaics, windows, cabinetry, laylights, and entryways, often with glass made specifically for his studio. A very special thank you to this episode's sponsor, the Stained Glass Association of America, home of the publication The Stained Glass Quarterly. Learn more about them at stainedglass.org. All right, guys, let's get into it. Join me as I crack it all wide open. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for joining me this morning. I'm sure you have very busy, important things to do. So I appreciate you. And I'm humbled and so glad to be speaking with you this morning. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
So I heard of you because Neely mentioned you as one of her favorite artists in episode 1. That's how you came on my radar. And I am so blown away by the work that you're doing. I feel like we all have like forever home goals, you know, like I want 2 ovens someday and, you know, a classic car just because, not because it's my daily driver. And now I have a new thing to add to my list. Now I want one of your pieces in my house, my forever home.
That's so great to hear. When I heard that, I was like, it was so special because, you work so much I'm sure you work so much in your shop, and we all do. And to hear like your name mentioned somewhere, it's kind of it's like, whoa, I feel like I'm locked away in the cave so much that it's nice to get that kind of, have someone mention you.
You're right. We are in our studio alone so much. And I think that's one of the reasons why this podcast has already been so popular, is because we're so alone. And then to all of a sudden have like a voice in your studio talking about what you're doing and hearing other people's stories that are doing the same thing. It's kind of it's a cool thing.
It's great because I've been kind of thinking, I've been listening to like woodworking podcasts and like interior designer podcasts, and trying to like, because we're all kind of like doing small business stuff. We're all kind of like touching on the same thing. And I've been just kind of like scrolling around looking for something like this. So I'm so glad that you're doing it. I think I've listened to them all so far, and they're really great.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, really good.
How long have you been doing stained glass?
I've been doing it full time for 24 years, but I started in college a couple years before that, and I did an apprenticeship. So maybe like 26, 27 years, something like that.
And you're working in Oakland, but are you from Oakland originally?
No, I'm from the Bay Area, but my family moved to Michigan, and we lived in Michigan from 1970 to 1980. And then I moved to Southern California, and I lived there till 1988 in Ventura County, a little town called Fillmore. It's like out in the orange groves. And then in 88, I moved up here to Oakland, and I've been here ever since.
Cool. Very cool. And I read that you kind of discovered stained glass in high school. Is that correct?
Kind of. I mean, it's my first exposure to leaded glass. My parents took me to a Frank Lloyd Wright house, and I was like a teenager. I was like, I don't want to go see this thing. And they took me there, and I was like, just kind of like, going through the motions. And I walked into the space, and the house, the Hollyhock house in Los Angeles, and it's like everything was so considered, like the light, the glass, all the architecture. And growing up in basically suburbia, I had never seen a home like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like a real nut for wood shop and metal shop and drafting. Those were my favorite classes in high school. And we were back in that school, we were using like mid-century, or not mid-century, but textbooks from the 50s and 60s. So all the work we were looking at kind of had this like progressive thing that we had no idea what it was. It was just like what we're supposed to draw.
Yeah.
And so going into this house, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so special. So the glass and everything about this house was like so unique, and it didn't like set me on this trajectory at that moment, but it kind of stuck with me, and I was like, ooh, architecture, it was
Mm-hmm.
really my first exposure to like really creative, architecture.
Yeah. Well, the Hollyhock house is Mayan revival, which is a very specific, unique kind of architecture. So I could see why none of us are seeing it in very many places. It would be like such a unique experience to see it in real life.
Yeah.
Um, for my Angelinos, that's in the Barnsdale Art Park. And it was
Yes.
one of the first houses that was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List,
Oh
which is,
wow. Yeah.
yeah, like one of the first like residences to be added. And that was a big deal too. So very cool property. It was just a couple of miles away from my house when I lived in LA. So I'm familiar with it actually.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, definitely worth a visit.
Definitely worth a visit.
Mm.
Okay, so you see this leaded glass and your hair is blown back. And then what happens? You just kind of put it in your pocket and go on to college?
No, I had no idea what I was going to do after high school. I was a wood shop kid. I thought I would be like get a drafting job
Mm-hmm.
after high school. That was like I was doing like pen and paper draw, straight edge drafting on
Mm,
a table and right around then was when CAD started coming in.
mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I did not want to spend I didn't have a computer and I didn't know anything about computers. And I was like, I don't want to be a drafts person and plus I only had a high school diploma. So
Mm-hmm.
I just bopped around. I worked at like a coffee shop and I did construction for a while. And then I started taking junior college classes here in Oakland,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a ceramics class. And I was like, oh my God, you can take ceramics in college. It's amazing. Because I used to watch on Sesame Street, like watch those, 2.5 minute little like demonstrations of people throwing. And I was
Yes.
completely mesmerized by it. And I was like, I really want to do that. And so, and you can, it was like $10 a unit. It was super cheap. So I started taking ceramics classes and I really got into it. And I was doing ceramics for 2 or 3 years. And I started realizing like, wow, you can get a 4-year degree doing this. It's totally crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started taking GE classes and I transferred to San Francisco State. And there it was the whole pottery, it was basically a pottery program. I was a hand builder and not really into throwing. I was never that good at it. And plus that it was like a really crowded studio. And so I had taken a glass class. They had explorations in glass. We did fusing and leaded glass. And that's pretty much it. It's just one semester long. And I love that class. I love the leaded glass portion of it, the fusing, not so much. But it was great because but pretty much all the other students wouldn't work in there after hours. So I had the whole studio to myself. So having the space to myself, I need a lot of quiet to work.
Mm.
And so I kind of just dug into it, partly because of the logistics of it's an empty studio, but the exactitude that is required to make leaded glass kind of suited just how I am.
What were your first projects like?
Uh, it's funny. I was digging out photographs because I'm kind of going back a little bit to my original style. I was
Mm.
really into like constructivism and Bauhaus aesthetics, like simple
Mm.
geometry with curves. I'll send you
Mm.
some photographs. They're kind of fuzzy photographs. I wasn't a drawer at the time. I was really only still just using drafting tools. All
Mm-hmm.
of my designs had this geometric element to it, and I was using a lot of like that program had a lot of old like industrial window glass,
Mm-hmm.
or like textured glass. And so I was kind of just finding materials, like using materials I could find. And so, yeah, there were just basically geometric designs with curves and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went on this whole trajectory. Now I'm kind of like re-looking at what I'm making. And I was looking at some windows recently. I was like, these are kind of like the first windows I ever made. And it's kind of interesting to think that to come back to this aesthetic.
Yeah. Well, tell me about how you went from that class to launching your business.
So I took the class, but the class is only one semester long. And I went to the advisors, saying that I really want to take more glass stuff. What can I do? And he recommended setting up an apprenticeship for myself. So
Mm.
there's a workshop here in Oakland, Narcissa Squagliata, who was just in West Oakland. And so I had never heard of him before. And I did the whole thing of like, knocking on the door and having the door slammed in your face, and then calling up a dozen times and like having calls returned. And at that time he'd had a lot of assistants in the 80s and 90s. He's kind of done with it, and but I really like wanted to learn more. And so it was like, I was super persistent. So eventually I got a spot in there to basically do an internship for a couple of years, and I got college credit for it. So I did that and learned a ton. And then it's like, I wasn't like, I'm going to start a business, because in the mid 90s, there was no model for like a small stained glass business that I was aware of. There was like, you'd have your stained glass shops and you have these really large studios. And I was like, how do I, like nobody, like start making windows? I have no idea. So I started making windows just for fun in my garage. But at the time I was still doing construction. I was in a touring band. I was a substitute teacher. I was a baker, doing all of these things. And then, but when I started my business in 98, it was because my son was on the way. And at the time I was primarily a substitute teacher, and I was coming home just completely decimated, like beat, because it takes a certain amount of it takes so much energy to teach. I was teaching kindergarten through 6th, and high school, like junior high is totally no way. I did that 2 days. It was too much.
Yeah.
So it would completely flatten me out. And I was like, I don't want to be a father if I'm like miserable and like just completely like not wanting to go into work. And at that time in Oakland, it was like really affordable. And we had a storefront that was only $500 for 1,500 square feet. And so I thought, well, if I can sell a few windows a month, I might be able to turn this into a business. And so that's kind of what I did.
And so when you started, did you have anybody working with you, or was it just you?
Just me. Yeah.
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 And you were just based on like commissions?
Yeah. So there's no, so I didn't want to do church work because it was just an aesthetic I didn't know anything about. And I was really wanting to focus on domestic windows, because that was my first exposure. And I didn't really see anyone making windows primarily for homes, like, windows that would be well suited to a specific environment. My first window was a project. A friend of mine was doing construction, and he's working on an old craftsman house. And so I thought that if I could have the homeowners buy the materials, I would design them a really nice window. They're like, okay. So they bought me, I designed something, and they went for it, and they bought the materials. It was like $300 for everything. And I was super nervous. I'd never done anything or done an architectural commission, but I did it, and they liked it. And I was like, wow, that worked. I didn't have to pay for that. And then I made a couple of kind of show windows. Like, they were just basically autonomous free hanging windows, like kind of large architectural things with wood frames. And I had my brother, who's a professional photographer, he photographed them, and I made like this black and white, like Xerox flyer. And I thought, okay, so I've got this thing that kind of looks like I know what I'm doing. And I wrote this little blurb, and I it was both sides. I spent extra to have it black and white on both sides. They didn't have color back then, or maybe they did. It was just like, it was super on the budget. And so I started walking into the fancy parts of town, and I was like stuffing in people's mailbox, which is illegal. You can't like just put whatever you want into
You
people's
can't
homes.
do that? Is that illegal now?
Yeah, I think so. You can put door hangers on, but you cannot just put your stuff into your people's mailbox. It's like post office
Oh,
only.
okay.
So I was just like, I got to get the word out. And I didn't know there's no like internet, or there was internet, but there wasn't any like way to like market yourself. And so I just went old school. I just hit the pavement, and I got one call, and these people were super nice. And they had some little, those little windows you get at the gift store at the Met. It's like a little Tiffany window and a little Frank Lloyd Wright window. There's these little tchotchke things. They hadn't kind of popped up against their windows. I thought, these people like stained glass. So they're the ones that called me, and they came down to my workshop at the time, and they saw the two pieces that were on the flyer, and they bought them, and they commissioned some more work. They commissioned quite a bit of work. And I was like, this is amazing. If I can do this like once a month, that's a business that actually works. And keep in mind also, I had a $500 rent, so it was like super, I didn't have a lot to cover.
Yeah.
and then their neighbor called, and then so I made them a window, and then I photographed that window before I put it in, and I'd send it to the newspaper, the San Francisco Chronicle, and they ran it in their home section, and that led to like 2 projects. So it's kind of like this like little
Yeah.
bit by bit, homeowner by homeowner. So I just, from my very start, I've always been doing, windows design specifically, like one of a kind. This is your window for this space. There it is.
Yeah. And did they dictate what kind of style the window was, or did you get to do more of a Bauhaus like style, or were they like, no, we want like prairie, we want, Victorian?
It kind of, it was all over the map. I mean, I never really got any calls for Victorian stuff, because even though there are a lot of houses here in the Bay Area, and specifically in San Francisco, that's
Hmm.
never really been my aesthetic. It's like I can appreciate Victorian leaded glass, but it's just a style that I'm just not. It just doesn't resonate with me.
Hmm.
So most of the time I didn't know what I was doing, and they didn't know enough about stained glass to really have an educated opinion. So I
Yeah.
just started digging, like in the library, and looking through historical resources
Hmm.
to just kind of like have an idea of what to do, because I had zero ideas. And I was like, they're really, yeah. So I was basically just kind of madly reaching out for anything I could find. And I would just kind of like, I didn't, the one thing I really was certain about is I didn't want to do reproduction work, because I
Uh,
knew that if I did reproduct like a Frank Lloyd Wright or a Macintosh or a historical reproduction, I would be competing with anyone else who had access to the same pattern. And I realized that I needed to do, and this was kind of reinforced in my apprenticeship. You need to kind of find your voice, and you need
mhm,
to, create a style that's recognizable, and
mhm.
you need to work on that. And if you can do that, and if you can get to a point where people see your work and they say, oh, that looks like this guy's windows, then it's just a way to separate yourself from competition. Or it's like you don't really have competition, because each person has this unique idea of what
Yeah,
is beautiful. And so that's kind of what I was after, just kind of
that's good.
trying to figure out, like, I've got this opportunity here. What can I do? I have no idea what to do. And I would just do, I would make dozens and dozens of drawings. And
Mhm.
because like, I was like, everything is garbage, but I'd finally find something that was like, or no, what I would do is I would take all the stack of drawings, and I'd show them to people, and they would kind of like, they'd pick 2 or 3, and so I'd refine those. And so it's just kind of like, it was rough. I mean, those first meetings I'd get so nervous, but they would help me like figure it out. And so, and then over the years I would kind of get more confident, and I kind of get these styles of like, I think this house, or I think this client is going to want this. So I would kind of develop these styles, and that's kind of how I started that process.
Are you still making custom windows for houses? Because I noticed on your website, you have as choices the rondelle, the doors, or the rugs. Are you still doing custom windows?
Yeah, so I know my website's a little confusing, and I'm reworking the whole thing with basically doing a whole rebrand to make that much more clear. So what we do, or what I do, is I design custom projects for people's homes. And what I'm going to start offering is basically, I'm going to still offer this kind of bespoke version of my work. So, I've been doing it so long, and it like takes up so much of my personal time to draw all these windows out from scratch, that it's
Hmm.
like I can't have every project that comes through my shop be a one of a kind build, which is
Hmm.
what it's been for 24 years.
Mm.
So it's basically, what I'm going to start offering is this kind of a configurable option. So you'll have like 5 leaded glass designs that you can start with, and
Hmm.
5 mosaic designs, and 5 rondelle designs, the
Okay.
patterns really.
Hmm.
And so, because not everyone wants to go through the really long process of commissioning something from scratch.
Yeah.
So there'll be basically this kind of configurable way to work, and then this bespoke way to work. So a bespoke project would be like, if we're going to do a whole house full of windows, or a specific entryway that is unlike anything I've ever done. So, and then the customizable or the configurable designs will be like, they're still adjustable. They still can be scaled to any proportion,
Hmm.
and I will still be involved with that process, but we won't be inventing the language that we're working with. It'll be kind of like, there we have a starting point, and so it's like, we don't have to worry about all this design stuff. We can just customize it and then build it and then install it. So
Okay. So I really love how on your website it's very organized in the sense that like you have these different color stories, different color collections for the rondelles, and then you
mm,
have like different, and then you have the samples of the glass that can go in between in terms of like different transparencies and texture. Um, I recently saw you posted on Instagram an unboxing video,
yeah.
like a repost. What product was that sample for?
Well, that's for a custom commission, and it's for one of these configurable designs. It's called Century Design, and so the whole sample set. It's like I would say for years. I mean, it takes me. I'm a really slow learner, so I've been doing this for 24 years, and just like in the past 6 months, I realized like every time I tell someone, oh yeah, I'll send you some samples. I have to first find the glass. I have to
Hmm.
find a box, make up this custom thing, and it takes so much time. So I
Yeah.
just recently realized, well, why don't I have boxes and glass that's already cut and labeled so I can just put it all together. So
Yeah.
the sample sets are just for that purpose. And so this is for a project in Virginia. We're making two large homes for a kind of an outbuilding on this really nice property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Where do you get your glass and rondelles? That could be a big question because I know for a lot of us we're like wherever we can, but do you
Yeah.
have like specific because you do offer now like a very specific selection?
Okay, so the rondelles are made by Monarch Glass in Kansas City. This guy Tyler Kimball.
Mm,
About in 2016, I got an enormous commission. I never made a rondelle window before, but we got a large project for a home here in San Francisco, and I had to order like 6,000 rondelles. And I was like, at that time, I mean, there was just basically Lambert's made maybe, you know, they had maybe 9 colors in 3 different sizes, and Kokomo made some, and there are a few other makers, and I was like, none of these are going to be what we need.
hmm.
And so I called Jim Callahan at Fremont Art Glass in Seattle, and he said, oh, who you should talk to? You should talk to Tyler, because he is the Rondell King. And I was like, that sounds good. I like that. So I started this relationship with Tyler as kind of at the beginning of his business. And so I said, Tyler, I've got this kind of nuts project. It's huge, and it's going to take up my workshop for about 6 months. I had to like double my staff. And he's like, that sounds great, because he was like looking for projects. And so we I started this whole practice of making these rondelle windows with him. And so anyway, he makes these rondelles for us. And then the glass, so it mostly comes from my distributor. I buy it from Franciscan Glass here in the Bay Area and
Mm,
Hollander in Los Angeles.
love
Sometimes,
Hollander. Shout out to Hollander. I love
yeah,
Hollander.
yeah. I've only been to the one in Los Angeles. I don't really understand that. I guess they have different outlets around the country,
Hmm.
but yeah. So, but I have some really good friends in Portland, so I'd always go to Bullseye and Ouroboros, and I
Hmm.
would dig through their seconds racks, because not only was it less expensive, but they had this weird glass that was like unlike what I was getting at the distributor, because just distributors tend to purchase what sells and stock what sells,
Hmm.
but I'm always looking for these weirder textures and colors. So I kind of got into this habit of like digging in suppliers' bins. And I would go to back east to back when Chicago Art Glass was a thing, in Cedar Grove, Wisconsin, and then Youghiogheny in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. Anytime, so I would travel, and I still do that from time to time. And now a lot of the times I'm commissioning custom runs because I want something really specific,
Hmm.
and it's not part of their regular thing. So I just basically order a case or two, and that kind of ensures this like supply, because when you're doing these large architectural commissions, you need like a lot of glass. And so that's how we do it.
Now, speaking of larger projects, and we talked extensively about this, Neely and I, but when you get an order that, has 6,000 rondelles, do you have an equation or a process as far as how you price your big pieces, big projects?
Um, so okay, so basically my whole business was like pre-pandemic, and then the year and a half since the pandemic started. So basically, up until like a year ago or so, my pricing has been like on pencil and paper, and it's revolves around, like, even though I've been doing it for like 24 years, it's still like the hardest thing. And it's like, how do I feel about myself? How do I feel about my work? All these like, personal, feelings come into this process. Like, is this okay to charge this? And it was just a mess. And I would write a number down on a piece of paper and I put it into a folder, and I couldn't find the piece of folders or the piece of paper in the folder. And so it was kind of a disaster. And then I realized, a friend of mine, he works for an investment firm, and he makes like super fancy spreadsheets. And I've always thought that spreadsheets were like just a place to store numbers. I didn't know what they could do. And so he kind of said, okay, well, like, what do you want to do? And so I kind of mapped out what it was I wanted to do. So long story short, he showed me how to create spreadsheets where I can basically create a database of all the projects that we do and how many hours they take and how many hours per piece. So when I'm creating so I've got this whole new system where I open a page and it like autofills all their dimensional information, and I can just select all the glass out of all these like drop down menus, and I can select comparable projects, and I can say, oh, these 3 projects take about, whatever it is per piece or per square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I've got like this this way of working, which seems right. And so then I'll do the old process, kind of like Neely was doing, for her big project. They have a spreadsheet system, and then she kind of went from her, like, what she thought it would be. So I'll still do that, like what I think it should be, and I'll compare these two. And so that's kind of what I do. It's like looking at this project from different angles. And it's really hard because it's like when you're doing custom work, you don't really know, like, people often want to start a project with like, how much, I like your work, how much does it cost? But I have no idea what I'm going to be building for them. And so I'll basically send them kind of like from what I know now. And since you like this type of work, I think your work will be within this range. But through the design process, it's like, when things get more complicated, I'll just say, like, just so you know, what you're suggesting that we do, that could double the cost of this window. And then we get to these decision points. So pricing is a challenge, but having the spreadsheet system makes it a lot easier.
That's amazing. And does installation, is that part of your quote?
Okay, so how I do it is, we kind of do 3 things. I design the windows. We're kind of a design firm, so we can work with an interior designer or an architect or a homeowner to basically create something from nothing. Then we source all the glass and fabricate it, and then we do all the installation. So I charge separately for those 3 things. So a design project could go on for months, and so I just basically let them know, here's what I charge per hour, and that kind of helps them make decisions in a more direct fashion. And then once we know what we're going to be at the end of the design process, and I know what we're going to be building, then I say, okay, this window that we've got, that we got before us is going to cost this amount to build, and I have no idea how long it's going to take to install it. I can give you an estimate, but it's kind of like, when you open up the hood of a car, like, you don't know what you're going to find. Like, if you go into an old house and, the sash have been there for 100 years, are they rotten? If you have to fly out to install a project, you don't know what the complications are going to be on site. So the installation is kind of like, it's like, here's what I charge per hour. And, usually takes, we have a minimum to come out to do a window, like $500 minimum. I'm not going to leave the workshop if it's, even if it takes just an hour or two to install a window, we have like a $500 minimum to show up.
Did they ever just take the window and then hire their own people to install it?
So when I started my business, I didn't want to be just local, because I knew that if things slow down locally, that it could be like, now what do I do? So I started advertising in this Bungalow magazine that went nationwide. And so I having a nationwide footprint allowed us to stay busy year round, and whether, like, 2008 and not have to lay people off. So I've always created my windows and sent them with instructions, and like give them my personal phone number. Like, once it gets there, like, have your person call me and I'll walk them through the whole process. Because if you're, so most of the time nowadays, I'll just walk the local contractor or the finished carpenter through the process of installing it. And at this point, I've got a lot of diagrams and how it's done and all that kind of stuff. But most of the time. It's rare these days that I fly out. I'll only fly out to do like really big installs.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, on your website, it seems like you've done a lot of talks and presentations and classes. Is that something you've done quite a bit of?
Yeah. So the talks are not really anything I planned to do, but kind of that process of like when I was starting to figure out like what do I want to make for people, I started getting books, and I'm like kind of a book hound. I just like I have a bit of a problem buying books. So I started actually the whole process. I was in Pasadena, and there's this historic home, and they had these incredible windows. And I was like, who made these windows? I've never seen these windows published before. So I learned about that architect. This architect was named George Washington Mayer. He was a contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright's. And he hired this firm, Youghiogheny and Hilgart. And they were a stained glass firm in Chicago, started in 1899, and were active through, through 1916. They went on to making church windows after that. But basically, I quickly learned that like there are these people that get books published about them, like Tiffany and Wright, and these names that we're super familiar with. But there are like dozens or hundreds of studios all around the country making super interesting windows that no one knows anything about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started like, I just kind of have this, I kind of started digging and like, figuring out where the houses are, and making, when I'm traveling, I'll make an appointment to visit the windows or the mosaics in a lot of cases. And I started photographing them and documenting these stories of these like kind of forgotten studios.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I had this work, I was like, now what do I do with it? And then I realized, well, I wanted to publish it, but I don't have any experience writing a book. But I was like, I think I could actually do a pretty good lecture on this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started kind of like, knocking on people's doors and say like, hey, I've got this information about someone you don't know anything about. Are you interested in the lecture? And so now, yeah, I've done a number of them, and I kind of love it. At first, I would get like really super nervous about it, and but at this point, it's super fun, and sometimes you get to travel to do it. Now, recently, it's been over Zoom, but I love having an opportunity to take this information or these designs, these decorative arts that people haven't seen, because these are in private homes all over the country. And it's like this work, it's like like these studios have these connections to these names that people know about. So people kind of do tend to kind of show up for these talks.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, I think it fills an important void in the understanding of our craft, because it's like, it's just lesser known studios, and there's just so much amazing work out there. I can send you some photographs of like some like really unusual things I found that I think are like super, super cool.
Yeah, I want to see all of that.
Yeah.
So you like doing those. Is there anything about doing that you don't like? What's your least favorite part of doing these talks?
The nerves. I get super nervous. And I used to read the talks, and I could see people like dozing off. But I love it. I totally love it. It's like kind of like teaching. Like I never thought I would be like, originally my mom was a junior high art teacher. First she was home economics, and then she was art. And I thought like when I went to college, like I'll be an art teacher, but then my substitute teaching like wiped that out from even being something to consider. But a number of years ago, I was asked to teach at this woodworking school in Indiana, the Mark Adams School of Woodworking. And I was like, teaching? That could be fun. And I went out there, and so I basically kind of created a project, and I went out. It was a 5-day class, and I never taught before. And at the end of 5 days, I was like, teaching is amazing. It's like, it makes you think about things from a different part of your life. It's because like, now I know how to cut glass really well, but how do I take this skill and translate it for someone who's never held a glass cutter? And so I'm super into like the practice of teaching, because the main thing is that there are so many things out there to learn that it's like you just can't learn. I mean, like different processes, like how do you make like a laylight that's going to sit flat like a skylight overhead? How do you make that strong enough? And how do you work with copper foil, lead, and zinc, and steel reinforcement? And if you want to weld something, like how do you do that? And how do you write up a proposal, and how do you create your own design language? All of these things that are there are all these different places to get it, but I really want to like teach some of the things I've learned along the way. And I've been doing it in different places. And I just started doing it in my studio recently, and I'm just super into it.
Yeah. So you're teaching now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had my first class was scheduled in April of last year, and I had to cancel that. But I just did my first class back in August, or was it? Yeah, in August. And it was a beginner class. So I've got kind of a large studio. Now we have 3,000 square feet, and we have a lot of air movement. And we're all fully masked, and everyone has to show proof of vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done it once, and it was great. And it's a little bit of a gamble. I mean, but anyway, and people, in that case, there were like 3 people that flew in. I was like, oh my gosh, they're flying in from like Kansas and rural Washington. And I was like, but with the vaccination and the masking and, the air movement and the distance we have in the shop,
Mm-hmm.
so far, so good.
Yeah. I mean, I teach too, and I love it.
Yeah.
I spoke with Flannery about this, and everybody's so pumped up at the end. It's like, it's a high.
Yeah, it's super fun. And it's draining too. It's like the end of a day, I'm just like, oh my God, I can't, because you're on your feet, you're completely engaged, you're doing demonstrations, and you're like getting into people, because people are all at different stages of a project.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of having to like slow down, and it's like constantly changing speeds.
Mm-hmm.
But I just really love it. It's super fun. And so yeah, I teach 4 times a year in my workshop, and I still teach at that school in Indiana.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Now, tell me about, what is artistic license?
Yeah. So, okay. So when I first started my business, it was just me in my shop,
Mm-hmm.
like 7 days a week, like 12 hours a day. And I was in my early 30s, and I was just hungry for a connection, and like kind of like that same thing of like, putting black and white flyers in people's mailboxes. I was just like looking through books, and there's a book written by Paul Duchir. There's a Bungalow book, and in the back were all these resources. So I was looking at the resources, and so I was giving people's names and sending them letters about my work, just to make some community.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was just me in my shop all the time. And then there's this thing called artistic license. There's a group of this period revival artisans in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was like, that sounds interesting. So I sent them a letter, and they sent me a letter back, and I was like, they invited me to a meeting. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So I went to this meeting, and I was just kind of blown away, because I was just, my trajectory was, I thought, I can do this physically on my own for 5 or 6 years, and I'll just totally burn out, because it's just to do this much work by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is the trajectory. It's like, then I'll have to actually get a real job. It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
But in this guild, it was like basically when the Victorian revival started happening in the early 80s,
Mm-hmm.
Interior designers and architects and wallpaper people and just anyone who worked on houses, they kept on seeing each other on these projects. And so they formed a group called Artistic License. And so once a month for, I don't know, like 35, I should know how long it's been a group, 35, 40 years almost. They would meet in projects they're working on, and they would talk about what they're doing. And it would basically be a place to kind of get community. And I was so amazed, like when I first went there, I was like, oh my gosh, there are people here who are old enough to be my parents, and they're making careers out of like building trades. I started going to meetings all the time, and they, like a year later, they invited me to join, and I kind of barely didn't have a body of work, but they saw that I was like really committed to like learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so they brought me on, and so I've been a member since 2001, I think. And so now we meet once a month, and it's super fun. And we, just basically, it's a great, the other thing about it is that you've got this access to other tradespeople who have all this experience, who can answer questions. Like I do mosaics, and when I started mosaic work, I didn't know anything about tile or mortar or backing board or anything. But there's a tile setting master. His name is Riley Doty. He's in his 70s, and he knows so much stuff. And I was like, Riley, I've got some questions. And he showed up at my workshop, and he just showed me everything. And so it's like that kind of that spirit of sharing is like really part of this group. And like, if you have a question about anything, you can call someone, an expert up in the group, and they will kind of walk you through it. So it's like a great way to, share experience.
And do you have to be do you have to live locally to be a member?
Yeah, that's one thing about it, is that it's a local group. And
Mhm.
so because we want people who are going to kind of participate and contribute. So you have to show up to meetings. So
Mhm.
there are some groups you can, like, I'm a member of the Portland Artisans Guild, which is kind of like you don't have to be regionally located to join that group. But artistic license you have to be, at least for a period of time. There are a lot of our members have moved away.
Mhm.
But you have to, there's kind of like yeah, you have to be a local person to join.
And you're saying you're a member, but you're more than just a member.
Well, I used to be the president.
Yes.
Yeah. They it's basically they voted me to be president. It's like basically there's probably 30 or 40 of us, so everyone kind of cycles through.
1906. 1906. That's how long the Stained Glass Association of America has been diligently printing their publication Stained Glass Quarterly, or SGQ, since we all love a good acronym here in 2021. So if you subscribe to the SGQ, you of course get a beautifully laid out magazine to enjoy, but you also have access to one of the most all-encompassing archives of ideas and knowledge, carefully curated and collected all in one place by craftspeople, stewards, and aficionados who, just like you, have a passion for glass. Yes, this podcast is about modern stained glass, but we didn't come up with this ourselves. Member support of the SGAA is crucial in passing the torch on to the next generation, who will be creating and caring for our stained glass treasures. Now, let's get back to Ted's interview. I want to go back to the glass mosaic stuff, because I can't believe actually that we haven't spoken about it yet, because I feel like, at least from what I saw online, it was almost like half your body of work was these incredible glass mosaic walls and fireplaces. But it sounds like that didn't come along till later.
Yeah. Okay. So that was one of the things. So I was going to Chicago. Remember, there's this house in Pasadena that had this amazing stained glass, which I'd never seen before. So the next time I was in Chicago, I had written letters and I started walking down the streets and knocking on because I had basically an architectural guide to this architect's houses, because I wanted to see these windows and photograph them, just because I just wanted to see them. And but I kept on seeing these mosaics in these homes, these fireplace mosaics, and the homeowners didn't know anything about them, but they were beautiful and unlike anything I'd ever seen. And doing a little bit more research, I realized that those mosaics were made by these stained glass companies that were making the windows, and they were all made out of glass. And I thought, oh my gosh, a stained glass company that makes mosaics. I'm a stained glass company. Why aren't we making mosaics? And so maybe 10 years ago, my crew and I took a class at the school, which is no longer there. It's called the Institute for Mosaic Art in Oakland. We took basically a basic introductory class, and we kind of learned about mortar and grouting and that kind of stuff. It's just like maybe a 2 or 3 day class. And I just started, using my design skills and our fabrication skills to start making mosaics. And it's so super fun, because it's super fun and a super important thing to do. I mean, it's fun because it's a new thing, and it uses a different uses glass in a different way. We're not looking at it with transmitted light, but with surface light and texture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, it's 2021, and I'm always assuming that this whole practice is just going to evaporate. So it's like helps me diversify what we offer. So, and also it's kind of a unique thing that, I mean, you can get like glass mosaic from big box stores or from tile showrooms, but I wanted to create kind of an artistic version, just an artistic, expression of what I'm interested in that can apply to a different surface in the home. And the nice thing is that, when you say, I'm sure you've had this where you tell people, it's like, oh, I make stained glass windows, and they have this, they think, oh, like in a church, or oh, I remember my aunt used to do that, or like in a pizza parlor, those kinds of windows, or those kinds of lights.
Mm-hmm.
And people have an idea of what stained glass is, which is often like, no, it's not like that. You know, I do this other thing. But when you say mosaic, I think it's much more. People don't really have a clear idea.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have set notions as to what it is. And with mosaic, you know, it can be inside, outside. It can be contemporary or traditional, historical. It can be in a public space, a private space. So it just kind of really opens up a lot of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at with that.
It looks much more labor intensive because there's so many pieces.
Well, yes and no. So okay, so when you're, as you know, when you're making a stained glass window, you cut the glass, right? You're just like barely going around first base. You've got to like grind it and foil it and set it and solder it, patina it, and sometimes putty it for making with windows with lead. It's like all of these processes. But when you make a mosaic, the cutting is kind of nuts. I mean, it's similar to leaded glass, but you know, we don't deal with lead. It's just slightly less toxic. There's a lot more particulate because we're using cements and mortars and grouts and silicones. And the other thing is, as you know, a stained glass window, it's like has to be self-supporting, and all the engineering has to be within the window itself.
Yeah.
But a mosaic, it's like, because you have this substrate, this backer board. So one of the things that we do is we don't, like when you order like a mosaic from a big box store, from a supplier, they send you it pre-mounted on sheets. Because we set the mosaic so tightly, we mount the mosaic onto the backer board. So a client would send us a template, or I will go out to the site and make a template of, say, their fireplace, and I will bring it back to the workshop, and we will build precisely to that template. So we make the work. We put tile tape on it, which is like I can kind of describe the whole process. So I do the drawing based on the template, and then I get contact paper, just like hardware store stuff. It's translucent, and we put it sticky side up, so we can cut all the glass and put it on the contact paper, and that holds it in place. Okay. And then so we do all the arrangement like that, and then once everything looks great, we put something called tile tape, which is basically a stickier contact paper. It's like really sticky tape. We put that on the surface, and then we put board on the top and on the bottom. We flip the whole thing over. It's like a giant sandwich. We take the bottom off, and now we're looking at the back of the mosaic, and we peel the contact paper off. And so then we basically take the original template, cut the backer board to fit that template, and we put mortar on the backer board and on the back of the mosaic, and we basically sandwich it. We flip the whole thing over again, let it dry, and then peel the tape off, and then we grout it, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. You know, I'm redoing my fireplace right now, and my wheels are turning so quickly. I'm like, oh, everything I thought I was going to do, I'm not, because now I'm doing a mosaic. You should
do mosaic. You should absolutely do mosaic. And you can, you know, I can tell you all the things that we use. But I mean, there are a lot of different ways to do it. But it's a great way to use up scraps. And a lot of times there's a lot of opalescent glass, which has a beautiful color and texture, but it's too dark to use for a window. And yeah, I think you should dig in and do it.
All right. After this, we'll talk more just about that. So we spoke a little bit about how it's different from doing lead or copper foil, but I've seen in some of your work, it looks like you're using both techniques. Like some of your branches, the thickness and the width, it looks like it's definitely copper foil, right? But then it's sandwiched in between lead.
I kind of have a lot of different types of work. I mean, sometimes we'll make a window with purely lead, and sometimes do just a copper foil window. But a lot of my windows have lead and foil mixed in. And I mean, I like lead because it has kind of a give to it. It's like, and it's because, you know, when you're making a window that's going into a door that's going to be, you know, open and closed 1,000 times, it has to have a little bit of give, I think. But copper foil allows me to have these organic elements that we can kind of, which is kind of like the signature of my work. And so, and now it's like, I don't even think about it. I just basically create these drawings, and then I kind of figure out like what would be the best way to execute this design, and what's the context that it's going to be in. And so basically a lot of my designs kind of have lead and copper foil mixed together.
Interesting.
Mostly for aesthetics. I just like the way it looks, to have this kind of like this kind of like refined line or this geometric framework, which sometimes corresponds with the architecture. And then to have this kind of like organic elements within the design that, might be a plant that is a favorite of the homeowners, or something that is significant to the site, or a regional plant that it grows native to that area. So I find that when I do organic designs in lead, they don't quite give me the expressiveness I want. So that's kind of why I blend these two things together.
And is it safe to use copper foil? Like, I always thought that if you have a piece that is exposed to the elements, if it's outside, then it has to be lead. But can you have copper foil outside too?
Yeah. So, it's a conversation I always have with a homeowner. Like, does your window get a lot of direct precipitation, or like, do your sprinklers like, hit your windows? Because if you're going to get water running down the surface of the window, and it's a copper foil window, you're going to get little trickles that come in through that window. So, but a lot of times, like if we're making an entryway, it's usually covered and there's not any direct rain on the surface of the window.
Okay.
So it's kind of a site specific question. I mean, I tell people that, like, you cannot make a stained glass aquarium. Like, even if you use lead or foil, it's like there's no possible way to make it purely waterproof. Even with a lead window that's perfectly puttied, if you blast it with a hose, water is going to somehow get through there eventually. So you just basically have to look at the situation, or what I do is I look at the situation, look at the conditions, and I just advise. It's like sometimes we won't make a specific type of design because if a window is facing in a certain direction and it's going to get, a lot of weather. And so it's like, it's just, unless there's additional glazing there, it doesn't make sense, because it's just going to, it will rot the sash out, because the water's going to trickle in, run down the surface of the window. The client's going to see it, and every time they see these little trickles, they're going to be irritated, because it's like, why did they do this, and why didn't they let me know this is going to be a problem? And then eventually the sash will rot, and then it's a callback, and then it's a problem.
Yeah, but there's no glass, you're saying, no like lead or copper, that's going to be completely waterproof.
Well, I mean, lead is definitely more waterproof, because with the cement, you can it kind of creates a gasket around the glass and between the glass and the metal.
Yeah.
But I mean, but copper foil, it's like if you take a copper foil window, even when it's like really burnished well, and you get it wet on one side, the water is going to somehow trickle to the other side. It's just that adhesive is not that strong. So
yeah. So your technique with the copper foil and lead together is so unique to you. Like, when I see a piece now, like your piece, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see it now, always being able to see it anywhere. There's a lot of Japanese influence. Tell me about that. Like, where is the Japanese influence coming from for you?
Well, my first stained glass class, it's kind of we learned about stained glass fabrication, but we talked a lot about design. And what the teacher, John Layton, this is at San Francisco State in the mid-90s, he forbid us from using patterns. And so we had to draw our own work, and he wouldn't let us do that, the type of design that you see, where it's like there's a flower and then these arbitrary lines that connect that flower to the design, or rather to the edges of the glass, to basically make it buildable. And so he kind of presented a number of different ways of like how different artists around the world deal with positive and negative space. And I never really looked at Japanese artwork before, but like, if you look at a Japanese woodblock print or a painting, from a particular era, they often have a really beautiful, I find it beautiful, this balance of empty openness and like areas of really tight detail. And I just kind of really got obsessed with this aesthetic, and it seemed to translate really well into leaded glass. And so what I started to do, it was think of leaded glass and the lead and the glass and everything. Like, I don't want the lead just to be a way, or the lead lines, the metal lines, just to be a way to like, paint my picture. You know what I mean? I wanted to have the lead be as important as the color, and I want the texture of the glass to be as important as the subject matter. So in a lot of these designs where I'm having this kind of Japanese influence, part of it is to have a balance between the small, the finely detailed activity and this open expanse, so that light can come in and it's not like everything all over the place. So there's going to be like a rest to the eye. And sometimes it's because I have this really amazing background glass that I want to kind of feature. And so yeah, it's like I Japanese aesthetics have been just, it's like something I keep coming back to. It's like I keep finding new things, like new approaches to color or new approaches to line, because a lot of my work, it has this kind of like gestural, like tree trunk. And there are so many artists that did really interesting things. And I think that there's a real practice of looking at nature and kind of creating something that has that character within it. And so I want to, it's like I want to have this work have some sort of connection to nature. And I found that this conduit, or this Japanese aesthetics, have kind of helped me look at things in a certain way and stylize them in a certain way that translates really well into leaded glass. I mean, I've never studied this stuff and I've never been to Japan, but I've got like a lot of books. I'm like kind of like constantly absorbing it, and it kind of, I find that absorption and like exposure, it kind of like, it just through osmosis just kind of sinks in. It comes out when I'm drawing, and so that's kind of how it affects my work.
Yeah. My absolutely favorite piece of yours is, it's a window that lives in a house in San Francisco, and it's a
Mhm.
plum blossom. And there's a cluster of branches, and then there's just one branch that's just, it's so poetic the way that it's branching away from all the other. It's just one little branch that's reaching away from the rest of them. I'll definitely put it in the YouTube video for everybody to see. But
Yeah,
yeah, it's just reaching away from the others, and it's such a, the composition is so poetic and natural and imperfectly perfect.
yeah, that's
It's
that's
really
something I,
special.
yeah, that's something I see. And it's definitely, a Japanese influence of like having, like, how can you take this lead and glass and create something that brings some interest. Like sometimes, like I did a 6-panel plum blossom, six panel design for a Dutch door. So it's basically just the top part of a door. One thing when I'm doing these multiple pane designs, I want each pane, like if you're to take it away from the whole, to be like something that has artistic merit. You know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
like, oh,
Yeah.
this is actually kind of a cool composition. It doesn't require the other 5
Hmm.
to work. And so so sometimes when I have those things going off, I'm thinking of like, what does this area need, or what would be an unexpected thing here, or what happens to this plant, in nature. And I just have a huge volume on my computer of images. And I'm taking, like, I just went backpacking for a week, and I'm like constantly photographing trees and plants. And my friend's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you gonna do with all these photographs? And I'm like, well, I file them and I look at them year round, and it helps me, because it's like, when you're staring at a blank piece of paper, you've got to take the first step. And sometimes I'm like, okay, so when have I seen this type of tree? So I will look into my folder and like see like a tree that has some kind of a gesture that might work with that space, or with
Mm.
those dimensions. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of, that's one of the ways I start my projects, like looking at photographs that of something that I've seen.
What a lucky tree. Of all
Yeah.
the billions of trees in the world, one of them gets to be one of your muses.
But I never make, I mean, because it's stained glass, I don't render that tree in stained glass. But sometimes it's like the trunk or a branch has a certain like crick, or like a little certain bend. And like
Hmm.
that's something cool about that, or something that I think would be an interesting line in this work.
Hmm.
I rarely depict a specific type of plant. Most of the times I'm basically creating lines that I think kind of suggest that. And
Hmm.
I'm not like worried about the specifics too much.
Hmm.
I'm wanting to make an aesthetic design that I think works as a stained glass window.
Yeah. Yeah. In 2012, you made this small prairie school inspired ornament for an artistic license benefit gala.
Mhm.
It's the smallest piece I've ever seen. you make.
Yeah.
Have you made smaller, like sun catcher-y, ornament-esque pieces since then?
No, like so when I grew up, my mom had these like sun catchers, and she was really into like Little House on the Prairie. So she had these like girls in bonnets and profile, and I just thought that they're the cheesiest things. They're like, kind of garage sale tchotchkes.
Hmm.
When I was coming up, it's like sun catchers were this thing of like, no, that's not my thing. And now they've become this like explosion of creativity. So to answer your question, I've only made that. I made that uh, ornament. I made 4 of those, and that was like a big production run for me. So I've never really made smaller works, but I'm starting to make just kind of smaller windows. That's one of the things I really want to do is, because I'm constantly drawing things, and we're making experiments in glass and in mosaic, and I'm wanting to have a store on my website where, if I want to make just an idea that is not dependent upon this, not the result of this custom client interaction. I want to, it's just a way to kind of experiment and create things. So I'm kind of moving towards that, not like a lot of people are, and where that's the sole focus of their work, but it's just a way to experiment things. And I think a lot of people like my work, but they don't really have a place like a full window to hang it. So having a small something that they could, you know, that's like affordable and accessible, and they can take it with them when they move. That's something
Yeah.
I'm interested in. So that's kind of like a long-term goal of mine, to like have an outlet for these projects, these experiments.
Yeah. I think that that's going to be very satisfying for you.
Yeah, because when when all of your creative output is directly tied to client commission. I mean,
Mhm.
it's always been. It's like, yeah, it's like, I basically, when I started my business, or when I had an idea for a window, I would make a small version of it, and I would photograph it, and I would have it in the studio, or take it to a trade show, or show clients, and like, oh, I like that. Can you make me that for my entry, for my for whatever it is? And
Mhm.
so I've always kind of had this practice of like, I need to make an experiment. I need to figure out these issues in a small piece.
Mhm.
And so I've always had these things around, and I have some at the shop, and I often sell them at trade shows. But these small pieces are basically experiments, and they're like kind of like a new idea I've never done. And once I have the piece made, I can show my crew, it's okay, here's how we're going to do it. This is the
Mhm.
glass, how it's going to be set together. But I think now that I'm not really doing trade shows anymore, it's like I want to have a way to get these out into the world.
I don't think I've ever I've never well, I know I have never purchased anybody else's work before, nor have I ever been like, I really want one of those, just because I have a wall full over here of my own work that I can hang up if I really, But I think I would buy one of your pieces.
Well, that's good to
I
know.
do. I think I would. Sign me up. Um,
Yeah.
on your website, you have this short film made by a gentleman named Fraser Bradshaw. And
Yeah.
in the film, there's this incredible dome that you did.
Mhm.
Is that the biggest piece you've ever made?
Possibly in terms of pieces, but the largest piece by square footage would be this large triptych, this kind of dogwood triptych we made for a house in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on the front page of my website. It's basically 3 panels going up a stairwell, and the tallest one was 10 feet tall, and then there's like a 10-foot tall, then like 8-foot tall, then a 6-foot tall window. And I never made anything that size, and so just the engineering of, like, first of all, we couldn't make a 10-foot tall window because it was just too big. You couldn't get into the space.
Mm.
So I had to figure out a way to do 2 things, assemble it together. So once it's assembled and sandwiched together, it looks as like a single window, but also a way to transmit, take that weight load
Mm-hmm.
off of the bottom window, because everything is sitting in a sash. It's basically all this that the 50 or 60 square feet of glass on top of it is going to really push on that lower window.
Yeah.
So so it was like a technical challenge to figure out the engineering of it, and aesthetically, but I'm really proud of that window, because I feel like it addresses both the structural issues of a window that size, but I feel like it has this lightness to it,
Mm-hmm.
and this kind of, and there, a lot of my work is addressing a specific issue. Like in that sense, in that project, it was a light well between two homes in San Francisco, and the homeowner was looking onto their neighbors, like, rotting stairwell, their exterior stairwell, and so they want something more beautiful. And so having this kind of organic design that kind of descends over these three windows, it kind of worked well, and I think it has a nice flow to it. So that's probably the biggest project I've ever done.
Is that your favorite one?
You know, I think that I've got like a favorite. I mean, my favorites are always changing, and a lot of times I hate my work. It's like, because we're always doing different things. I'm like looking at the work is like, is this anything? Is this even a design? Like, is this going anywhere? Like, and there's this like insecurity that I have of like, especially because we're always doing different things. And it's like, is this thing just like a retread of something I've done before, or does it have like, is there something to it that like is worth pursuing? And so a lot of times I'll put my work in, and I'm like, okay, it's yours now. I just need to get in and get out of here, because I've just been too close to it. We'll often do a project for a client, and we have a lot of repeat business. So we'll create windows for a home over and over again. Like, we'll first do the cabinets, and then we'll do some lighting, and then we'll do like the front door. So I was in a home, and the clients really wanted a redwood design, and it was a kitchen window. And I didn't want to have like this like design that would, first of all, block out a bunch of light, and would be just kind of dominate the room. So I wanted a balance of organic elements, but also the structure that kind of would allow a lot of light in. And I saw this window recently because I'm back at that house, and I thought that there's something about that window that I think I figured out, because it's like, it's got some line work that's uniquely my own, and this branch work kind of has this. It's basically the branching and the needly areas are two layers of glass. So I had to figure out so much on this window, but like when I look at it now, and the clients are so happy with it, I think that right now is my current favorite leaded glass window. And then I have a favorite mosaic. It's a fireplace mosaic for a home in Berkeley, and the clients had some like kind of old, like kind of paver bricks in there, and they're kind of falling apart. And so they wanted something more aesthetically pleasing, but they kind of had this 1910 house, but they wanted something more just edging on modern, but something to respect the historicism of their home. And so I drew up this design. Like, I'm always looking at, one of the things I do a lot of is I don't just look at stained glass design for ideas. I look at a lot of textile books, and Japanese art, and a lot of different things. And these Japanese textiles will often have this underlying pattern. And in the sense of, or in the case of this fireplace, there's the asanoha, the hemp leaf pattern. But I would see this pattern in sashiko embroidery, which is where you have like this indigo fabric with this white linen stitching. And the asanoha pattern, it's something you've seen. It's kind of a pattern that's ubiquitous. So I kind of created this structure of that glass, and then I had these descending flowers that were kind of like, they're stylized flowers. They're not naturalistic flowers, but the arrangement of them took me a lot of time, and I really wanted to have this like kind of this rigidity and this relief of these, like, it's almost like these flowers were like descending down on the fireplace asymmetrically, and there are a few on the hearth. So I did the fireplace and the hearth separately. Wow. And when I look at that, it's like that has something it's like I spent so much time on the arrangement of those flowers. It's like these little details. And like I see it in your work too. It's like where it seems like you've got the special glass or the special slice of a stone. And it seems like you've put so much time. It's like, it's not just like happenstance. You like really think like, how do these things go together? And how do I get how do these elements come together? And I feel like that mosaic is one where it's like, it came together.
It just like harmonizes,
Yeah.
It just sings. Where you're like, oh, those notes together, just
What is it?
chef's kiss. Yes. Is there one person in your stained glass journey who's like been a huge influence to you? Whether it be like a teacher along the way, or somebody specific to your journey in stained glass?
There hasn't really been a single person. I mean, there's definitely, I would say that, the people that have, gone down the path ahead of me and
Mm-hmm.
have shown me, like, I remember when I was doing ceramics, this guy had made this like whistle, and I was like, whoa, how did you, I didn't want to make a whistle, but he had figured out how to make this valve in the mouthpiece. And I was just kind of curious how he did it. And I asked him, and he's like, you figure it out. And I was like, it was this kind of this, it was this expression of no, I was like, I'm not, I get tear up here a little bit because I'm, I get really passionate about this stuff, but like, so there's some people who are like, I've learned it, now it's your turn, you figure it out. And then there's other people who are like, oh, you're interested in learning this thing. Here, I have this knowledge, let me show it to you. So the people who have been along the way, who've like answered my questions and like willing to sit down with me to help, because it's like we all have questions and we don't know how to, and we're all looking at these projects that are beyond what our skill set are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really like into this idea of sharing. So that's really been a big part of like a big help for me. It's like
Yeah.
when I'm going down this path, it's like I don't know what's next. Like, what do I do? I've been fortunate through just connections that I've made, and I often will just like call people up out of the blue,
Yeah.
other business owners, like, how did you do this thing? And I'll take them out to lunch, and they'll kind of tell me. And I think a lot of times people who've gone down the path or who had this experience are actually enthusiastic to share what they've known because they get a free
Mm-hmm.
lunch out of it. And they
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, you know, it's like not a lot of people like Riley, my friend Riley, who knows all this stuff about, I mean, he doesn't have any kids and he doesn't have any apprentices. He did at one point, but he's got like such a body of knowledge that he's like, yeah, take it, do something with it.
Yeah.
I love, so that's been a big deal. That's been a big help.
Yeah.
Big,
I could be wrong, but it seems like in my experience, that's more of a trait that the old guard has. I feel like with a lot of like the new guard,
yeah,
New Testament is all of it's like it's much more competitive and a lot more guarded.
yeah. Oh, you mean with sharing that you
Yeah.
think,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's too bad. I mean, I understand like I mean, I'm very competitive myself,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like there's so much work out there, and there's so many questions. I mean, there are so many people out there are so many techniques haven't been written about, that I just look at books. I'm just trying to figure it out, and I experiment. But if there was like a place or someone to call up, you know, I don't know. And the other thing is like we have this information, like why sit on it? Like my style is like I will always make these organic windows,
Mm-hmm.
but when I teach my classes, I'm like kind of showing people how I do all this decorative soldering and how I kind of get these branch like lines, because I don't need to hold on to that stuff forever, because I can do that and I can have my clientele. But it's so exciting to me to see people take something that I've taught them and like make something that is uniquely their own. So I think that's killer.
Yeah, I think that's cool too. I'm not I have been known to hold information. I have
Yeah,
definitely had people like DM me on Instagram and ask me questions about my work, and I've just straight up been like, no.
yeah. And let me also not create the impression I'm just like this like free font of information. There are definitely proprietary things that I've spent a lot of time figuring out
Yeah.
that I actually don't make. Like for instance, like this rondelle set I when I started making rondelle windows, you cannot go out and buy a set of rondelle colors to show clients. So I had to commission one from the glass blower. I have like, about 200 colors of custom rondelles. That's an amazing resource. But if I just like gave that or like posted that on the website, it would just be like this, like, something I spent a lot of money on. And all these colors and the language to create these colors are something I had to work with Tyler to come
Mm-hmm.
up with. And it's
Mm-hmm.
so totally, there are things that
I
so
think we're
I think it's okay to tell people like, here's why I can't tell you that, because this is kind of what I make my career on.
this
This
is
is,
what my signature thing is.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I always try to say like, you know, here's, give them some sort of way to like, not, I don't want it to be like a roadblock. It's like, here's what I would encourage you to do. Maybe look at this, or maybe think about it in this way, trying to give
Mm-hmm.
them something to like, because every art practice is like a series of 1,000 decisions, and you have to, if you're only looking at other people's work and making your decisions based on what you see, your work is always going to be kind of derivative. But if you are always looking afield and always try to expand your, like bring in more ideas from different places, I think that you will just, your work will improve and you'll get, I don't know. I think
It'll
there's
be
always,
richer.
it'll be richer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I think that that's one of the reasons why I love your work so much and why everybody loves your work so much is because you have a way of incorporating your love of architecture and history and textiles and nature, and you're always thinking about it. And even when you're not, when you're on a backpacking trip, you're taking pictures of the way that there's weird bends and branches and I think that like when you bring all those things together, it's such a unique, special thing that's can only be yours because it's your life experience.
Yeah, the biggest compliment I've ever gotten about my work is from this guy, Peter Scherpenzeel. He is a Tiffany lamp maker. And, we all know, we've all seen Tiffany lamps, but he's a Dutch artist. And I was in Amsterdam and I went to his studio, and his work is just gorgeous. And his sensitivity to glass. And even though he's often working with these, these existing patterns, the work has so much soul. Anyway, what he told me was, he said, when I see your work, I recognize that it's yours. And that was like the biggest compliment because, it's like, I think we all probably have this love-hate, this fight, with our work where it's like, is this anything, is this going anywhere? And then to get to a point to have a body of work that kind of that somehow has this unique perspective. That's like, when he told me that, I thought like, wow, that's maybe I've done something here,
Yeah.
it meant a lot.
Yeah. I agree with him 100%. I fumbled through it, but that's what I was trying to say like 10 minutes ago with the combination of the copper foil and the lead. I'm like, now I know when I see that it's gonna scream you.
Yeah.
Um, your stuff's magic. It
Oh,
really is. Yeah. I think that there is something to be said too for just like owning that you have. So I'm speaking about myself in that when I first, I have all these moons that I did, right? And they're all
yeah,
circles and they're all like very specific. And I got like really like uncomfortable with that, where I was like, I have to show the world that I can do more than a circle, but now that I'm starting to do some other stuff, I'm like, okay, yeah, I know I can still do other stuff, but I'm drawn back to the circles and I'm drawn
yeah,
back to starting that kind of identifiable product again.
yeah.
And I think that that's okay.
It is. I think it's great to have, I think it's important to have different, to push yourself, first of all, to push yourself in different directions. Like,
Yeah.
to make, I can make architectural work in those large pieces that you're making. It's like, you're obviously like are learning so much. I mean, I'm assuming that like just the structure of making a large piece that's, maybe 6 feet tall, there
Mm-hmm.
are like all kinds of questions that you have to figure out that are different than, and so it's like, it's so great uh to be making or taking, your like line work or your approach to materials or your soldering technique and apply it to an architectural thing or an architecturally scaled piece. It doesn't have to go into a piece of architecture,
Mm-hmm.
but and I think it's good. I think it's good to uh get out of our comfort zones and
Mm-hmm.
like try something, because I know that I spend a lot of time in like this area of discomfort, like, with like this feeling of like, oh my God, is this going to amount to anything? Is this client going to like this? Is this going to have a soul,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that struggle of that questioning, that like that working on a different scale or working on a different shape, or it's so important to
Mm-hmm.
keeping things fresh.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Um, so you told me a little bit about your future goal of like making smaller pieces that are a little bit more accessible and based on designs that you want. Do you have any other future goals besides that?
Um, well, I've heard a number of people on your podcast talk about work-life balance. And so that's that's
Mm-hmm.
that's that's when I 24 years and I'm still struggling with.
Okay.
And I am actively working on, ways to delegate. I've got a crew, and I've just hired an office person to help me manage some of the stuff. So I want to get to a point where I can really kind of like not be thinking about it all the time. That's a big, that's my number one goal. And having the store, it was a big thing for me. And I used to do lighting, and I kind of got away from it because we would only make like one of a kind lights. So we basically given them a space and opportunity, and I had to figure out everything. And they're these large, often like boxy wooden, like Japanese lanterns, and it took so much time to create this three-dimensional work, which has this leaded glass element, and like the straps that hold it can support the weight, and it's UL, it like meets all UL code. And I basically got to a point where I was like, I'm not enjoying this ultra long, one of a kind, lighting commission process. So I've totally like taken it all off my website, and I want to get back to, I hope that someday I'm going to have an idea, because I love lighting, and like the friend of all glass, her lights, she was talking about, she just loves the way, like, she doesn't want to see a light bulb, and she wants to focus on the glass. And it's like, I want to like basically figure out a way to look at glass in a different way, and present it in a light that is unlike what I've seen before, and I don't know what that is. And so it's something I think about a lot, and I make drawings of, but I want to get back there where I can do lighting as well.
Cool.
But more like as not like a one-off. It's just to make a one-off, like make a design once and then it's done. It's just too much work. So like kind of have like a line of lights.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And who are your favorite artists or artist?
Well, I did write a few things down here.
These lists are starting to get wild, you guys.
So I have a book by this artist named Toshiro Kawase, and it's definitely like a burning building book. Like if my garage is on fire, I like run in there, like grab this one book and run out. I first saw his work on Pinterest, and he had this project of making a flower arrangement a day for a year. And the book the book is in Japanese, so I don't know a lot about it. In fact, I kind of like not knowing a lot about it, like what his process is, because it's a picture book of these 365 arrangements, and it's just like you can see the seasons change as you go through the book, and you can see what's in bloom, and there's just these they're very spare, very sparse arrangements. He's like I guess a well-known ikebana like flower arranger in Japan. He's written a number of books, but this one book in particular, each little arrangement is this just beautiful composition, and it speaks to, for me, it's like if you look, there is something of interest, of beauty everywhere. And it's like my mom was really into roses, so for a few months in the year we'd always have roses on the table when I was growing up, but it's like nothing else the rest of the year. And this book is like, no, there's interesting things going on if you're just willing to look. And so it's really a beautiful book, and I had to go to this Japanese bookstore to order it. I think you can get it from you can go to your fine local bookstore and order it. I can send you the link to the book. Another thing that I'm really into are textiles and quilts. And another thing I found on Pinterest was this Bosna quilt collective, and I don't know a lot about it. But as I understand it, during the Bosnian War, there was a woman artist who brought some refugees into her studio. She was a painter, I believe, and they basically created a collective where this painter didn't know anything about quilting, and none of these women had ever quilted, but they're making these quilts, these kind of minimalist quilts, very simple, but with really just beautiful stitch work. And they basically started making them and offering them for sale. And they're really beautiful. And I learned so much about color and detail when I see these. And I just recently got a book about their work. And it's so moving, because I always feel like there's so much to learn specifically about color and the way these colors interact, and the way that, quilting is so much like stained glass in that they're often using patterns, and they're using commercially produced materials, and they're trying to create things that speak to, or some sort of personal expression. So I think quilting is a big influence for me. And for leaded glass, there's this guy I recently learned about, well, a couple of years ago, Edgar Miller. He was a kind of a designer, an artist and designer in Chicago in the 1920s, and he would create these artistic spaces. He's working with this guy who was a developer, and they would buy these buildings, and Edgar would go in and kind of reimagine the space, and he would make mosaic installations and make like wrought iron, like blacksmith work, and these beautiful stained glass windows, which involve a lot of geometry and painting. And when I first saw it, there's a big book, like a coffee table book about Edgar Miller that's widely available. It's just stunning because he's using these old kind of machine produced textures of glass, and like beautiful, like mouth blown cathedral glass, and painting, and using this material in a really interesting way. And it was completely unlike anything I've ever seen. And what I love about it is that there is some subject matter in the windows, but a lot of times these windows are just screens for light to come through and for you to like kind of perceive light in a different way. It's not all about the composition. It's about, here's just a way to create some privacy, but also to be aware of light. And that attention to material is really cool. And then there's a woman on Instagram. I don't know her personally. I think her name is Amber Droste, or Droste. Her website is, or her Instagram is Soda Ash and Sand, and her windows are amazing. She's, if her windows have so much character, and she's like, she recently made these signage windows. If you look at old like stained glass catalogs, you'll see like, drugstore, and it's written like in stained glass letters, and it's meant to go in a transom over a window. So there's this tradition of stained glass signage. And she had created these signs, a couple of signage windows, which have so much natural ornament, and her color sense, and her, like all the decisions she makes, like every single one is like, where did this come from? It's like her glass selections, her line work, her just, and the way it all comes together. And she does like landscapes, which are completely unique. And she does these kind of abstract windows and these kind of organic windows. And her work is really killer. So every time I say her work, I'm like, oh my God, look at this thing. And it's really fantastic.
I'll check them out.
Yeah.
Okay, final question.
Yeah.
Who would you like to nominate to be on the podcast?
Well, I think you should see if she's interested, because I think that I would definitely like to learn a lot about, more about what her influences are. One of the things that's so exciting is like when I started my business, it's like there weren't many people making stained glass windows, and there are stained glass shops. But nowadays, to see so much creativity in the glasswork, and like the fact that this podcast exists, that there's people are like interested in stained glass, it's so exciting. And you're doing such an amazing job with it. Not only like talking about, you're talking about artistic inspiration and how people run their business, but it's just, it's really great. I think I really appreciate the fact that you're doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really,
I
really
think
good.
that, I've said this before. I don't know if I've said this on the podcast, but I really think that I did say this. I remember saying it, but there's so much more in these stories. They're just great stories.
Yeah. I think that it's just good to, it's just good to have, like, hear about people's struggles, or hear about people's challenges, because it's like, we all present this curated, I'm definitely guilty of it, of this like, curated version of what we do on the internet. But there's so much nail biting, and like, sleepless nights, and like chin scratching, and all this stuff, and it's great to hear other people's processes. So I thank you for creating this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm really enjoying doing it. Before I did this podcast, I still do it a little bit, but so I was a hairdresser for like a million years, and I was very much like a connector in my community of Los Angeles, in terms of like What do you need? Do you need a lawyer? I know four. I know four different kinds. They're on standby. They love me and they'll do favors for me. I can call in a favor for you if you need it. Or what do you need? Do you need, what kind of doctor do you need? I have a couple doctors, you know what I mean? Like I was always sort of like connecting people. And then when we left LA, we moved to Portland. We were only there for 3 years, but in that 3 year period of time, I felt this like really sense of like loss and grief over not having that role anymore in my life and like being that person. Um, it was sort of like one of those unexpected surprises of moving, is that there was that element of like an identity crisis that happened from like leaving my tribe. And I haven't felt that sense of being a connector until I started this podcast, where I
Oh,
feel
well,
like I'm like bringing all these people together, because there is the old guard and there is the new guard and there's a lot of people in between, and there's a lot of people who aren't being celebrated and aren't feeling seen and aren't hearing the stories. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm doing something really important too. I know it's a little self-indulgent to say, but it
no, it
feels
is.
right.
It's super important because um, we I think we all probably spend most of our days like, with our heads down, look, working, and it's there's a lot of solitude, and it's just to have a connection with people, and the quality of connection that you're creating through this podcast is super worthwhile. And it's just so great to see this like craft that we all love getting like some thoughtful attention.
Yeah.
And it's I really thank you. That's really,
Thank you. Thank you for
yeah,
saying that.
yeah.
And thank you for your beautiful work that you're putting into the world. I think that, you know, again, like it makes sense that you love quilts because your body of work is a quilt. It's a quilt of your life in terms of pulling in all of these influences and um, weaving them together into like beautiful, beautiful work. And um, I love how your love and appreciation of history is woven in as well. And yet your work is totally yours.
Mm.
It's not reproductions of what has been made, even though you can feel the weight in the history in a good sense of the history behind it. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, I think that um, I just when as I look into history, and especially as I look at these more obscure artists, I just find so much creativity and so much inspiration and so much like almost modernity, like this like people, and a lot of American artists like wanting to get away from this European tradition and thinking like probably asking themselves, 120 years ago, like the same question we ask ourselves every day, like, how can I make this unique? How can I make this worth a project worth pursuing? And I just love seeing all the different ways that people have answered that question. And not in all old stained glass, because there's a lot of stuff that's like, nah, it's not my thing. But I think
Mm-hmm.
that I've found that there are certain artists around the country and around the world that really just create something that's completely like how do they think of that, or how do they
Yeah.
put this material together? Like I'll give you an example, and I see it in your work. I don't know if like your decorative soldering,
Mm-hmm.
uh and it's like your use of your lines aren't just lines that kind of hold the piece together. It's like it has this textural element. And the work of Charles and Henry Green, they're Southern California architects, contemporaries of Frank Lloyd Wright, but they had this whole language of leaded glass, which involved a lot of organic elements and a lot of decorative soldering. And it's like, I didn't know anything about decorative soldering until I saw their work. And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could do that with solder. I didn't know that solder could uh, have that much character. And so I think that is, I just found that it's a way to expand, open your eyes to what's possible with. And I think that if you approach it in a specific or in a certain way, you're able to absorb it, and it will come out in your work, rather than it being feeling like a redo or a rehash or like a revision of it. It can be fresh. And you can these all these different languages that are out there. You can kind of like, what I found is that you can kind of look at them and kind of understand them. What are the principles of these languages, these stained glass languages? And can I learn it well enough to write something that's poetic here? And that's kind of like the struggle. And if I can do that, I think it's
You can do that over and over and over again.
worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, you strike me as a person who, no matter what you ended up landing on in terms of career path, you would have done an insanely good job at it. Your attention to detail, but also just like you're so articulate and intentional
Mm.
in your pieces. And so I see that, especially now after you've spoken, I see that that's just your personality.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I haven't always. I think it's definitely been a work in progress. Like, yeah. So that's nice that you say that. That you see that. Like when I first started, like my mom thought, like, you can't make a living doing this. She said, you should go into advertising, or you should get, you need to get a real job. And so for a long time, I thought like, oh, this is something I will do temporarily, or this will be something. But as I distance myself from that kind of thinking, it's like, and as I've been open to experiences and working with clients and trying things out which I have no experience doing, or just jumping into things, I found that it can help give you a confidence of like, that worked, it's like somehow that thing is still standing and the people like it, and I can take that experience and build onto it. So that's one of the things that I feel lucky to have, stuck with it this long. I feel like I have a big enough toolbox that I can approach projects, new projects, like enormous projects, with some confidence that, like, I don't know how I'm going to do it or what my design is going to be, but I think I can figure this one out just like I figured out the other ones.
Yeah.
So,
Building blocks.
building blocks. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the end goal. It's just to have another building block.
Yeah. Yeah. And to counsel, I mean, for me, at least, to constantly be just like, looking at other practices and other people, and not stealing, but like trying to like figure out like, how do they make something that's so unique, and how can I not take that idea, but take that, that effort or way of looking at the world and create something that's, unique. That's the goal for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for joining me today and sharing all of this just amazing information with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, have a wonderful, productive day in the studio, and I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye. To see more of Ted's work, his Instagram is at Theodore Ellison Designs, and my Instagram is at Runa Glassworks. Please also check out this episode's show notes for some really great links to Ted's glass suppliers, some super cool articles on different artists, and links to some really beautiful books he spoke about. He also has an advanced leaded glass class he's offering coming up soon if you're interested and can get to Oakland. More info about that on his website. Next week's episode is with Lauren Zorick Earl of Sklo Glass. Please make sure you tune in for that one. And a big thank you to this episode's sponsor, the Stained Glass Association of America, home of the Stained Glass Quarterly. Thank you for listening. Bye.